She said it in front of 23 people. I counted. I do that. It's a habit from work. You assess the room, you note what's in it. You document 23 people in my grandfather's living room. 4 hours after we buried him, holding plates of food his neighbors had dropped off that morning. The sectional sofa he'd had for 11 years pushed back against the wall to make space. His reading lamp still on, the way it always was, because nobody had thought to turn it off yet. Or nobody wanted to be the one to. My mother stood near the mantel. She had been standing near that mantel for most of my life, positioned just slightly in front of everything, the way a person stands when they've decided a room belongs to them. She said, "Your grandfather knew, at the end, who actually sacrificed for this family. He chose accordingly." She was looking at me when she said it. She said it calmly. That was the part I kept coming back to, later. Not angry, not grieving. Calm, the way you are when you've been rehearsing something. My name is Claire Maddox. I'm 34 years old. I've been a registered nurse for 9 years, and for the last 3 of those I've worked as a nurse care manager, which means I coordinate care plans. I read medical charts the way other people read text messages, and I document everything, not because I'm paranoid, but because documentation is how you protect a patient when the system isn't paying attention. I was also my grandfather Harold's primary caregiver for the last 2 years and 1 month of his life. This story is about what my mother and my uncle arranged in the 7 days before he died, and about the document that proved they never should have been able to do it. The reversal has already happened. Harold got what he wanted. It just took 4 months, a probate attorney, and 61 pages of my own nursing notes to get there. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. If you have ever been the person in your family who handles things, the one who shows up, who drives, who knows the medical history by heart while everyone else asks you to remind them, this one is for you. Take a breath. You're going to want to stay until the end, and if you're new here, welcome. Hit subscribe before we go any further. These stories come out every week, and this one in particular, I'd hate for you to miss what comes next. I want to go back to that room for just one more second. 23 people. Plates of food going cold. My Uncle Derek standing slightly behind my mother, the way he always stood slightly behind her, looking at the carpet, and in the back of the room, near the door to the hallway, a woman named Rosemary Tate, the hospice nurse who had covered my shifts so I could sleep, standing very still, watching my mother's face. She had a folded piece of paper in her left hand. I didn't know what it was yet. But she was already looking at me like she'd been waiting for the right moment to hand it over. Harold James Maddox was 79 years old when he died, and until the last 8 months of his life, he was the kind of man who fixed things before you noticed they were broken. He was not wealthy in the way that word usually means. He had a house in a mid-sized Ohio town paid off that he'd bought in 1987 for $54. Suzanne Zounds, and which was assessed at $198,000 the year he died. He had a savings account, 2 CDs, and a small investment account he'd built slowly over 40 years of working for the County Water Authority. He had a neighbor named Gerald, who had lived next door for 31 years, and who came over every Thursday to play cards and eat whatever Harold had made, which was usually chili or a pot roast that had been going since morning. He had opinions about the weather, a deep distrust of anything described as low-fat, and a laugh that started somewhere in his chest and took a moment to arrive at his face, like it had to travel. He was my favorite person. His daughter was my mother, Patricia. She was 58, and she had spent most of her adult life being the kind of woman who is described, at every family gathering, as having done so much. Nobody ever specified what. That was part of how it worked. The vagueness was load-bearing. If you asked what specifically she had sacrificed, the question itself became the offense. Patricia controlled the family the way people control a thermostat, not by doing anything dramatic, but by being the one whose comfort everyone else unconsciously calibrated to. When she was pleased, the room relaxed. When she wasn't, nobody could quite identify why they all felt slightly on edge, only that they did. She had a gift for the public version of things. Funerals, holidays, hospital waiting rooms. Patricia was exceptional in all of them. She knew what to say when to touch someone's arm, how long to hold a hug. In private, she was more efficient. Less performance required. Harold's son, my Uncle Derek, was 54, and he lived 40 minutes away in a house he'd bought with money Harold lent him in 2009, a loan of $31. Susan that had never been repaid and had never, to my knowledge, been discussed again. Derek was not unkind exactly. He was the kind of person who is agreeable in every individual interaction and unreliable across all of them combined. He returned calls eventually. He showed up when things were already handled. He had opinions about what should be done that he expressed after someone else had done it. He and Patricia were not especially close when Harold was healthy. That changed in Harold's final year. I noticed it the way you notice a change in a patient's baseline, not an alarm going off, just a number shifting slightly outside its normal range, the two of them texting. Derek's car in the driveway on days that weren't holidays, Patricia staying after dinners when I left, which she hadn't done before. I filed it. I didn't act on it. That was my error, and I've made my peace with it. My role in the family had been established, so gradually I couldn't have told you when it started. I was the one who knew medicine, so I was the one who explained Harold's diagnoses to everyone else, who called the insurance company when claims were denied, who drove him to his cardiology appointments and his pulmonology follow-ups, and later, his palliative care consultations. I managed his medication schedule on a spreadsheet I updated every time anything changed. I coordinated with his primary care physician, his cardiologist, and eventually the hospice team. I did this because I loved him. I want to be clear about that. I also did it because, in my family, if you have a skill, it is assumed you are available to use it, indefinitely, without inconvenience to anyone else. The fact that I was a nurse was treated less like a profession and more like a family resource. Harold never treated it that way. He always said thank you. He always meant it. That was the difference between him and everyone else in that house. And that is exactly why what happened on that Tuesday morning matters. The first time my mother described my caregiving as convenient. I was sitting across from her at Easter dinner, 2 years before Harold died. Harold was in the living room watching television. He'd had a good day. He'd eaten well, walked to the end of the driveway and back without stopping. Told the same story about a fishing trip in 1974 that I had heard approximately 40 times and still laughed at. Patricia was talking to my aunt on her left, and I was passing the rolls, and she said, not to me, to my aunt, but loud enough. It works out well for Claire, honestly. She gets the hours, she gets the experience, and she doesn't have to pay for a gym membership because she's over here 3 days a week anyway. She laughed. My aunt laughed. I set the rolls down. I didn't say anything. I looked at Harold's empty chair and then at my plate, and I thought, she genuinely believes that. She has constructed a version of this where I am the one receiving something. I finished dinner. I helped clear the table. I drove home and I did not think about it again, or I told myself I didn't. 6 months later, Harold had his first significant cardiac event. Not a full infarction, a warning, his cardiologist called it. He was home within 4 days. I adjusted his care plan, added a second daily blood pressure check, updated the medication log. Derek came to visit the following weekend. Harold was resting in his chair, the television on low, and Derek and I were in the kitchen and he said carefully, the way people say things they've been thinking about for a while, have you looked into memory care facilities? Just to know the options. Just in case. I said Harold didn't have a memory condition. Darek said, not yet. I stood at Harold's kitchen sink, the one with the slow drain that I'd been meaning to call a plumber about. And I looked at the window above it, and I thought about the words, not yet, and what they implied about how long Derek had been thinking about the future of Harold's house. I said I'd keep it in mind. I did not keep it in mind. I kept it somewhere else, somewhere I could find it again if I needed it. The notary's business card was the third thing. I arrived for my Thursday shift about 8 months before Harold died and found it on the kitchen counter, next to the coffee maker, partially under a dish towel like it had been set down quickly. Davis and Kern Notary Services, with a handwritten date on the back, a Wednesday 2 days earlier and a time, 2 p.m. I was not there on Wednesdays. Rosemary covered Wednesdays. I picked up the card. I held it for a moment. I set it back down. When Patricia arrived an hour later, I asked about it. Lightly, the way you ask about something when you want to see how a person chooses to answer. She said, "Oh, that's nothing." Derek had some paperwork sorted out. Just estate things. You know how Derek is, he needs everything in a folder. I said, "Sure." She said, "You don't need to worry about it, Claire. You have enough to manage." That last sentence sat in the room for a second after she said it. I went to check Harold's afternoon medications. He was in his chair, a crossword in his lap, reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. He looked at me when I came in and said, "There she is," the way he always did, like my arriving was the resolution of something. I did not ask him about the notary. I didn't want to worry him. That was the honest reason. The other honest reason was that I was afraid of what he might say, and I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Harold's decline accelerated in February. By March, the hospice team was involved. By April, we had transitioned to full palliative care, comfort-focused, no more interventions. The family group chat, which had been mostly silent for months, came alive in the second week of April. Derek posted a paragraph about the importance of getting aligned as a family before things get more complicated and suggested a call that Sunday. I replied that I was working Sunday, but I was available Monday evening. Nobody scheduled the Monday call. I found out later, much later, from my cousin Maya, that the call happened Sunday anyway. She had been on it. She was 19, and she didn't fully understand what was being discussed. She said it was mostly Derek talking about the property, and Patricia saying things like, "We just want to make sure Harold's wishes are honored." And Maya thought that sounded reasonable and didn't know enough to hear what was underneath it. She cried when she told me this. She said, "I didn't know, Claire. I thought it was paperwork." I told her I believed her. I do. The Tuesday was the last scene, the one everything else was building toward. It was the first week of May. Harold had been in and out of consciousness for 4 days. His pain was being managed with oral morphine, 8 milligrams at 7 a.m., with additional doses available every 4 hours as needed. I had documented his morning assessment at 7:45 a.m., non-responsive to verbal commands, unable to state the date, unable to state his own address when asked. I wrote what I observed. I always write what I observe. That is the job. I left at 9 a.m. I had been there for 14 hours. Rosemary was coming in at 9 to cover. I drove home, took a shower, and was asleep by 10, at 2:15 p.m. I know the time because Rosemary noted it. And because the notary's timestamp confirms it, a notary arrived at the house. My mother and my uncle were both present. Harold James Maddox, who that same morning could not tell anyone what year it was, signed a new will. I was asleep 4 miles away, in the apartment I'd moved closer to his house 18 months earlier so I could cut my response time down. I didn't find out until the reception, but Rosemary was there. And Rosemary wrote everything down. If you're still with me right now, you already know where this is going, and you also know that feeling of watching something happen and not being able to stop it in time. If this story is hitting close to home, stay with it. The next part is where everything changes, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it now. It takes 2 seconds. And it means the next time a story like this one goes up, you'll actually see it. A lot of people who need these stories never find them because the algorithm doesn't show them. You subscribing is what fixes that. Hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. And let's keep going, because Rosemary's piece of paper is about to become the most important document in this entire family's history. The reception ended around 6. People filed out slowly, the way they do after funerals, nobody wanting to be the first to leave, but nobody wanting to stay either. Coats retrieved from the bedroom, foil-covered dishes carried to cars. Somebody turned Harold's reading lamp off, finally, and the room changed. I helped stack plates. I wiped down the counter in his kitchen, the one with the slow drain, and I thought about nothing in particular, which is what I do when I am thinking about something very hard. Rosemary found me before she left. She came into the kitchen, and she stood next to me, and she didn't say anything for a moment. Then she took a folded piece of paper from her jacket pocket and set it on the counter between us. She said, "I kept a copy." I looked at it. "I didn't open it yet," she said. "I didn't know what they were going to do with it. I kept a copy." I said, "Thank you, Rosemary." She nodded. She squeezed my hand once quickly and left. I folded the paper and put it in my purse. I finished wiping the counter. I said goodbye to Harold's neighbor Gerald, who was the last to leave, and who held my hand in both of his at the door, and didn't say anything, just held it. And that was the moment I came the closest to losing my composure. I drove home. I did not cry in the car. I sat at my kitchen table and I opened my laptop, and I pulled up the nursing log I kept in a password-protected folder. 61 pages, covering 14 months, every assessment, every medication administered, every observed change in cognition or responsiveness. I found the entry from that Tuesday morning. I read it again. I closed the laptop. I opened Rosemary's paper, read it. Set it face up on the table. I sat there for a while with the kitchen quiet around me and my phone face down next to the laptop. Then I turned the phone over and I looked up probate attorneys in Ohio. I wrote down 3 names, then I went to bed because I had a shift at 7, and Harold would not have wanted me to miss it. I called the first attorney on my list the next morning from my car before my shift. In the hospital parking garage where the signal was bad but just good enough. Her name was Janet Okafor. She had been practicing probate and estate law in Ohio for 19 years. Her assistant answered. I explained in 3 sentences what had happened, and the assistant put me on hold for 40 seconds and came back and said Janet could see me Thursday at 4. I said Thursday was fine. I went to work. I did my job. I checked in 14 patients that day, coordinated 2 care transitions, updated 3 medication plans, and ate lunch at my desk in 11 minutes. On my break, I made a list in the Notes app on my phone of every document I had and every document I thought I could get. The list had 9 items on it. Thursday. Janet Okafor's office was on the 2nd floor of a building downtown that smelled like carpet cleaner and old coffee. She was in her early 50s, small, with reading glasses she took on and off while I talked. She did not interrupt me. She let me finish. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You're the one who wrote the morning assessment." I said yes. She said, "And you're a licensed registered nurse with 9 years of clinical experience." I said yes. She took her glasses off and set them on the desk. She said, "Tell me exactly what you documented." I had printed the entry. I slid it across the desk. She read it without touching it, the way attorneys sometimes read things, and when she finished, she looked up and said, "Non-responsive to verbal commands. Unable to state the date. Unable to state home address." I said, "At 7:45 in the morning, 6.5 hours before the notary arrived." She put her glasses back on. She said, "What else do you have?" What I had was this. 61 pages of nursing care logs, covering 14 months and 3 weeks, every visit, every assessment, every medication administered, every documented change in Harold's cognitive status dating back to the previous March. My own handwriting, my own license number on every page. I had Rosemary's agency assessment from that Tuesday morning. The hospice agency used a standardized intake form that included a cognitive screening, orientation to person, place, time, and event. Harold had scored 2 out of 12. Rosemary had written at the bottom, in her careful block handwriting, "Patient lacked testamentary capacity per nursing assessment. Documented, signed, timestamped 9:17 a.m." I had the hospice physician's palliative care notes from the preceding 4 days, which I had requested from the agency, and which documented a consistent and progressive decline in responsiveness and orientation beginning April 29th. Harold had not had a documented lucid interval after May 1st. The notary's visit was May 6th. I had the medication administration record I had kept on my own phone, a habit I developed because the paper logs at the house were sometimes incomplete when I arrived, and I wanted a backup. 8 milligrams oral morphine, 7 a.m., May 6th. My notation, my timestamp, and I had the notary's own timestamp, which Patricia had not thought to remove from the copy of the new will she'd shown at the reception, because why would she? She didn't know I would be looking at it the way I look at a chart. 2:15 p.m. 6 hours and 30 minutes after my assessment, 4 hours and 58 minutes after Rosemary's Jeanette laid everything out on her desk in a row, slowly, and she looked at it the way I sometimes look at a patient's full medication list when something isn't adding up. Then she said, "Do you understand what you have here?" I said I thought so. She said, "This is not a close case, Claire. I want to tell you about the moment I ran the full number because it mattered." Jeanette walked me through Harold's estate. The house, assessed at $198,000. The savings account, $67,400. 2 CDs totaling $29,500. The investment account, $17,200. Total $300 under Harold's original will, executed 3 years earlier, when he was fully competent, in Janet's colleague's office, with 2 witnesses and no morphine. That $312,100 was distributed across 5 people: Claire, her 2 younger cousins, Gerald, Harold's neighbor of 31 years, and a small local scholarship fund Harold had contributed to for years in the name of his late wife. Under the new document, all of it went to Patricia and Derek. I sat with that number for a moment: $312,100. Not split between 5 people who Harold had chosen carefully and deliberately. All of it redirected in a document signed by a man who could not tell anyone what year it was. I looked at Janet's desk, and I thought about Harold in his chair saying, "There she is," every time I walked in. I thought about the slow drain in his kitchen sink that I never did call a plumber about. I said, "What do we do first?" Janet pulled a legal pad toward her. She said, "We file a will contest in probate court, and then we let your documentation do the talking." She clicked her pen. She said, "You kept very good records." I said, "I always do." The contest was filed 11 days after the reception. Jeanette handled the filing. I handled the evidence binder. 61 pages of nursing logs, Rosemary's assessment, the physician's palliative notes, the medication record, a signed affidavit from Rosemary, and a timeline I had built myself, the way I build care timelines at work, in a clean table with dates, times, and sources cited for every entry. Jeanette looked at the timeline and said it was the clearest document she'd received from a client in recent memory. I told her I'd had a good template. Patricia found out about the filing from Derek, who found out from the notary, who had been contacted by Janet's office requesting the original execution records. My phone rang that evening. I watched my mother's name on the screen until it stopped. She called again. I watched it again. She left a voicemail. I did not listen to it for 3 days, and when I did, I listened to it once, standing in my kitchen, and then I saved it to a folder on my phone labeled with the date and deleted it from my voicemail. The message was 4 minutes and 11 seconds long. She cried twice. She used the phrase "tearing this family apart" once, and "what Harold would have wanted" 3 times. She did not say she was sorry. Derek sent a text 2 days after that. It was long, 11 lines, and it moved through several positions in quick succession, the way a person does when they haven't decided yet what they actually want to say. It started with, "I think there's been a misunderstanding," moved through, "We were just trying to protect Harold's legacy," and ended with, "I hope you'll think about what this is doing to Mom." I read it. I screenshotted it. I saved it to the same folder. I did not reply. There was nothing to say that my documentation wasn't already saying more precisely. Probate proceedings in Ohio are not dramatic. I want to be clear about that, because this is the part of the story where the reality matters more than the narrative. There was no courtroom scene. There was no moment where Patricia was confronted publicly and forced to answer. Real probate court is paperwork and waiting, and your attorney sending you email updates that you read between patient check-ins. What happened was quieter than that, and more final. The opposing attorney, hired by Patricia and Derek, argued that Harold had experienced a lucid interval on the afternoon of May 6th, that it was possible, medically, for a patient on palliative morphine to have periods of clarity, that the notary had observed Harold to be, in her assessment, responsive and aware. Janet submitted the full medical record in response. She submitted the hospice physician's affidavit, which stated that Harold's documented cognitive decline was progressive, irreversible, by May 1st, and inconsistent with the capacity required to execute a legal document. She submitted Rosemary's signed assessment, time-stamped 9:17 a.m., scoring Harold at 2 out of 12 on the cognitive orientation scale. She submitted my assessment, time-stamped 7:45 a.m. Written by a licensed registered nurse with 9 years of clinical experience, who was also, as Janet noted in her filing, the patient's primary care manager and the person with the most complete longitudinal knowledge of his cognitive baseline. She submitted the medication administration record showing 8 milligrams oral morphine at 7 a.m. And she submitted the notary's own timestamp. 2:15 p.m., the opposing attorney had a notary's lay observation. We had 4 clinical documents, 2 licensed medical professionals, a physician's affidavit, and 61 pages of nursing logs. The ruling came on a Thursday morning, 4 months and 9 days after the reception. It arrived as a PDF to Janet's office. She forwarded it to me at 9:43 a.m. with a one-line message, "Read page 4. I was at work. I read it in the hallway outside the break room, my back against the wall. My badge lanyard twisted around my fingers the way it gets when I'm standing still for too long. Page 4. The court found that Harold James Maddox lacked testamentary capacity at the time of the document's execution on May 6th. The medical evidence presented was consistent, credentialed, and contemporaneous. The document executed on that date was invalidated. The prior will, executed 3 years earlier when Harold was fully competent and present in body and mind, was reinstated in full. I read it twice. I straightened my lanyard. I went back to work. Patricia called that afternoon. I know because my phone showed the missed call at 2:48 p.m., which was while I was in the middle of a care transition meeting that I did not leave. She called again at 4:15. She did not leave a voicemail either time. Derek did not call. He sent one text, 2 words, "Call me." I looked at it on my drive home. I set my phone face down in the cup holder. The prior will was reinstated. The numbers were exactly what Harold had written 3 years earlier, in full competence, with no morphine in his system and no family members standing just outside the room. The house, the savings, the CDs, the investment account, $312,100, distributed exactly as Harold had intended. To the people he had chosen deliberately, carefully, without pressure, without an audience. I did not go to the probate hearing. There was no reason for me to be there. I was at work, doing my job. The same job I had always done. The same job my family had always assumed was simply available to them because I was the one who had it. Harold had known better than that. He had always known better than that. The document proved it. The distribution took 6 weeks to process after the ruling. Janet handled the paperwork. I signed what needed signing and returned documents within 24 hours of receiving them, which Janet said was faster than most of her clients by a significant margin. I told her it was a professional habit. She said she wished more of her clients had it. My share came to $71,400, which was what Harold had always intended me to have. My two cousins, Marcus, 26, and Maya, 19, received $52,800 each. Gerald, Harold's neighbor, received $18. Zerozen and a specific bequest of Harold's card table and the the set of chairs that went with it, which Harold had written into the will by name, which made me have to set the document down for a moment when I first read it. The scholarship fund received $17,100, which was the remainder after fees, and a small outstanding property tax balance. Patricia and Derek received nothing beyond what Harold had already gifted them during his lifetime. $31,000 to Derek in 2009, and a car Patricia had needed in 2014 that Harold had paid for outright, $11,200, which she had also never mentioned again. I do not know exactly what happened between Patricia and Derek after the ruling. I know that Maya told me, about 2 months later, that they weren't speaking. She didn't know the specifics. She said there had been a phone call that she'd heard one side of, and that Derek had said something about how it had been Patricia's idea, and Patricia had said something that Maya couldn't make out, and then the call ended. I did not find satisfaction in that. I want to be honest about that. I had expected to, and I didn't. It just sounded like two people doing what they had always done, which was find someone else to account for the consequences of their own decisions. Patricia sent a letter. Handwritten, 3 pages, which arrived 6 weeks after the distribution was finalized. I read it standing at my kitchen counter. It covered in order her grief, her intentions, her belief that she had been acting in Harold's interest, her acknowledgement that perhaps she had not handled things well, and a closing paragraph that described my legal action as a choice that said something about my character. She did not use the word sorry. Not once. In 3 pages, I folded the letter. I put it in the folder with Derek's text and my mother's voicemail. I labeled the folder with the date, and I have not opened it since Maya called me on a Sunday in October, about 5 months after everything was settled. It was early, before 9, and she apologized for calling early, and I told her not to be sorry. She said, I just wanted to say, I know you didn't have to fight for us. You could have just, I don't know, let it go. I said Harold wouldn't have let it go. She was quiet for a second. She said, no, he really wouldn't have. We talked for 40 minutes. She's studying nursing. She told me that like a question, her voice going up slightly at the end, and I told her she'd be good at it. She said she thought she might be. She said Harold had told her the same thing the last time she'd visited him, one of his last good days. I believed her. That sounded exactly like something Harold would say on a good day. That phone call was the one good thing that came directly out of all of it. That was enough. I still have a birthday card Harold gave me when I turned 30. It's in my desk drawer at home, the shallow one that sticks slightly when the weather is humid. His handwriting was large and careful, the way older men write when they want to make sure you can read it. He wrote my name at the top, and then he wrote, "You have always shown up. Don't let anyone make you feel small for that." I don't know if he knew, at 69, how specific that advice would become. I think about competence a lot now, what it costs, how a family will build quietly around a person who is capable, the way water finds the lowest point in a room, not maliciously, just inevitably, because the path is open and nobody has closed it. I was Harold's caregiver for 2 years and 1 month. I drove him to 37 appointments. I managed 4 medication changes, 2 hospitalizations, and 1 very difficult conversation with a cardiologist that nobody else in the family could have had on his behalf. I did all of it because I loved him, and because I was the one who could. My mother was right about one thing. Actually, Harold did choose accordingly, at the end, just not the way she meant it. He chose 3 years before he died, on a clear morning, in a room with no pressure and no audience, when he was fully himself. He wrote down what he wanted, and he signed his name, and he trusted that it would hold. It held. I am still a nurse. I still document everything. I always will. If this story stayed with you, if you have ever been the capable one, the one who shows up, the one who handles it, share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And if nobody has told you recently, being the person who does the work has always said more about your character than it ever said about your availability. Harold knew that. Leave a comment below telling me one thing you refuse to let go of quietly. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.